Heritage Protection and Restoration Scrutiny Working Group. Can I ask those people who are present if you can go around the room and introduce themselves to the people that's joining us on screen, please? So I'm Councillor Mike White. I'm the convener of this working group, and next to my right is.
Next to your right is my name, which is Councillor Michael. We have the mic on. Sorry. I'll start again. Right, good afternoon. I'm Councillor Michael Locke, representing Scrutiny Ward.
Yeah, Lyndon Jones, councillor for Bishopston.
Peter May, councillor for Uplands Ward for my sins.
Rachel Percival, scrutiny officer.
And I'm Steve Smith, placemaking and heritage lead for the council.
Paul Ralph, strategic economic regeneration manager for the council.
Martin Ridgway, group leader in technical services building department.
Tom Evans, I manage placemaking and strategic planning.
Good afternoon, Councillor David Hopkins, Deputy Lead, Joint Deputy Leader, Cabinet Member for Delivery, here represent, well, in the absence of Elliot King, who I'm covering today.
Thank you very much. We obviously started recording meeting. First item, can I have apologies for absence, please?
We've had no apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Second one, disclosure of personal prejudicial interests. Anybody going to declare? No. The prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. Is anybody there? No. Have you received any public questions?
We've had no public questions.
Okay, thank you. Right then, we move on to the item 5, which is the Heritage Protection Restoration Report. I hope you obviously would have read the report. Okay, so what I'll do now is to ask the cabinet member if you'd like to briefly introduce this report, and then the officers.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just being here in the absence of Elliot King, so forgive me. Those my portfolio. I must say I've got a shared passion for some of the heritage assets to celebrate some of the successes, particularly over the last few years. I think we're in a very strong place within Swansea, and I think although ongoing, there are still challenges with grant funding, and that will continue to be. But I think what we have got, just to take it back, we have got a legislative role that we must carry out as a planning authority and as a county. But I think alongside that, I think if you look around the room, I'm blessed with the amount of officers here today, just to ensure that we, I must apologise, RFD is ringing me back at this particular time. He probably knows I'm covering his portfolio as well. So what I'm blessed with is officers from across the police directorate who have come here today, because it's not just a planning function. I think we see some of those successes that have always been the way we work collaboratively across the authority. So got nothing else to add to today, really, only to thank you for the questions in advance. I'm going to say some of them very, very difficult questions, but very right and proper. So for me, I think a big thank you to the officers for the successes, but I will agree some of the challenges going forward. They are challenges, but I'm sure collectively we work together across them challenges. So more than happy to hand over at this point to my colleague Tom, who will take us through the report at this point. Tom.
Thanks, Councillor, and thank you, Chair. Brandar, everyone. So just to introduce things from officers, the report before you is essentially split up into sections on all the factual information about our heritage assets, including the latest register of listed buildings and all the work of CADU on this. And then it picks up on all the successful outcomes projects that we've managed to deliver in Swansea. And we're going to start things with a presentation on those in a moment. What the report also does is set out our whole corporate and strategic approach to the preservation and restoration of of heritage assets. And as has been highlighted there, Councillor Hopkins, this is our whole approach is very much about working across departments. And making full use of our strengths across planners, placemakers, cultural officers, and those involved in the really important stuff of securing funding and project managing our schemes. So the report goes through that and does finish with scoping out some of those areas of future challenge, including in respect of the funding and really the very nature of this issue in terms of it being evolving, never stand still in terms of buildings that need attention, and there's always a requirement to keep looking at our priorities and which buildings, which structures, which projects need our attention most. So I'm sure members will have lots of questions on each of these, but before we do that, as I say, it's the presentation. I'm really looking forward to the members seeing that, because what it will do is really bring to life the scale of our achievements as a council. It's quite awe-inspiring actually to see some of the extent of transformation of so many projects where in some cases the challenges seemed insurmountable. And the amount of work that was required to breathe new life back into these buildings were huge, really, and there's no doubt that it needed the work of ourselves as a council of officers and members, but working with our external partners. Governmental, Welsh Government, with CADU, but with the private sector as well, and making sure we get those that are interested in investing in Swansea to turn their attention to some of these key assets. So on that point, then I will hand over to Steve Smith, who is going to, as I say, start with some of those really exciting projects that we've been part of.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chair. We've got a visual presentation to start with. The report outlines the listed buildings at risk that have been brought back into use, the projects that have been delivered, some of the projects we've currently got ongoing, and some of the kind of future challenges that we see. So what this visual presentation clearly can't cover all of them in the time available, but brings it to life with some of the key headlines of some of the projects that we've been working on recently. Some of them are very well known, some of them aren't, and it's just a spread where we can across the wards of the city to show that it's heritage is in all locations. So the first one is obviously high profile, is the former powerhouse canteen building at the Havod Morva Copperworks, which is on the screen at the moment there. Interestingly, this building was restored before in the 1990s, and one of the key theme of all these buildings that come back into use is they're redundant and at risk because they're defunct for their original use, and the key thing is to bring them back into restore them for new active uses. It's not just about restoring empty shells, because then they can't be used, and then we've got further problems. So the building, when it was previously restored, I think was then damaged by fire, deteriorated again. We were very lucky to secure significant funding for the powerhouse from the National Heritage Lottery Fund, based on a commercial repurposing of the building. So many of you would have visited since. That's the building literally just before it opened, when it beautifully restored, completely new roof structure, new clock tower. Internally, the council put the building back together as a space which was then fitted out by Penderyn Distillery. So on the right hand side, that's would have been the canteen hall where various works, people on the copperwork that have eaten their sandwiches and taken their breaks, and then it's got the distillery installed in the space. Fits perfectly as a kind of reuse of the building. There's the visitor centre as well. So that's an active example of a Grade 2 listed building at risk that was owned or is owned by Swansea Council, actively being repurposed there as a major heritage visitor destination. Another building. This is the the privately owned Albert Hall in Swansea city centre. So the council has never owned this building. This has passed through a number of hands. Most recently, it was the top rank bingo hall. A few different uses were considered. And then more recently, it was bought to be repurposed, mixed uses as the food hall. It's successfully reopened with significant funding from the council and from Welsh Government. The level of work that my team engages in is obviously we have to assess these proposals. Well, first we identify them as listed buildings at risk, so we know these are the ones that have to be prioritised. These ones have regeneration potential in the city centre. And then take them through the listed building consenting process, which involves reviewing reams and reams of plans, detailed proposals, negotiated them to an acceptable outcome, referring them to CADU for their review. And then once the project gets on site, we're often visiting these buildings about once every fortnight to keep on top of them, because we don't really know what's in half these buildings till they start coming apart. This, for example, Albert Hall, the picture on the middle there had these amazing metal shutters, which dated from about 1880s, the original music hall shutters to close off the light when the space during the daytime. They survived hidden inside the wall coverings that nobody knew that they were there. So they're still waiting to be reinstated. And so we learn about the buildings as we go, and we have to be flexible, we have to be adaptable in order to get the positive outcomes at the end. Often it involves considerable change. These are the spaces inside the Albert Hall before they started. It's had considerable subdivision. There's lots of new uses on the upper floors and the new food hall in the centre. And this is the building now. It's finished. It's not quite finished on the front. There's some signage and a canopy to go, but that was a problematic, very large grade 2 listed building at risk, and now it's a major destination in the city centre for food hall, offices, and some residential accommodation as well. So another major success story, been operating for over a year or so now. Then the Palace Theatre, where we're working constructively with a private owner, again, considerable funding support from council and Welsh Government. The private owner, eventually that sort of hit the buffers, so to speak, and the council stepped in and purchased the building. It was in very poor condition inside, but actually structurally a really good building. And as we all know, this is recently reopened as well as a co-working hub on the High Street as a catalyst stimulus project on the upper High Street area there. Flexible uses and all sorts of interesting things can happen in that building. So it's more than just a heritage project, it's a whole regeneration and community project in some of these locations. Other buildings that are coming through, again, privately owned. This is the former Windsor Lodge Hotel, which is privately owned and has recently been repurposed with no funding support whatsoever as an assisted living facility. So this building was derelict when I was visiting it with an absentee owner. There were holes in the roof. You could see the sky through the roof of the dormer on the top, on the back there. It's been sensitively renovated and it's back in use. It's great when the heating comes back on in these buildings. You can sense the life coming back to them. There's still a few things to sort out on the front, and that's where we have to work closely with owners to make sure we're finding that balance of facilitation to bring buildings back and keeping the heritage qualities of the buildings. Another one that's been resolved privately owned through a combination of, let's say, focus from planning enforcement and building control and built heritage is number 8 and 9 Wine Street, which was fairly dilapidated. Many members might recall there was scaffolding on the front to protect the risk of maybe debris falling off the building. That was a concern, and it was a concern in terms of nighttime economy. That building has now been fully repaired at the owner's expense and is back in, well, the ground floor is in use and the upper floor is looking for new activities. Danvert House in Morriston, so it's not just about city centre buildings. There's a major building in one of our key towns. This building has got a really interesting history. It was last basically the job centre for that region, severely dilapidated now, but a huge amount of potential. So we're working closely with funding colleagues on this one. There's scaffolding going on as we speak. So shortly there's a funding package to allow scaffolding to be put up around the building to safeguard the building. We've done pre-application so we can see the building could convert quite nicely into high quality flats to bring a sort of diversity of accommodation back into that Morriston area. And this building is certainly not beyond saving and it needs to come back, but it definitely needs funding support. These are some of the buildings we're not too sure about what to do with. So these are all listed buildings. They're not owned by the council. One of them, the Whitford Lighthouse, as my understanding, is owned by Carmarthenshire Council, following the dissolution of the, I think it's Llanelli Harbour Trust. The one on the top is a winding house, coal mine winding house near Three Crosses. Then there's a pigsty and then there's a lime kiln. So these are the ones where they don't have an obvious function, but they are key to the identity of our areas, especially our rural areas. And we need to understand better ways to work with private owners to safeguard these structures, and we are doing that specifically through the Gower Natural Landscapes team, the what would have been known as the Gower AOMB team. This is another one of these beehive pigsties down in Pill House near Llanmaddock. Members might recall I presented this to planning committee a little while back. So we've granted listed building consent to repair this structure, and given we're providing grant funding to the owner there. It's a tiny structure, but it counts as one listed building, so it's got exactly the same status in the databases as the Palace Theatres. This is one listed building, the Palace Theatre is one listed building, totally different, both unique. This structure here, the pigsty, is actually on the Wales coastal path as well, so it's got a good high profile in the rural location. There were some questions about how are we kind of getting ahead of some of the issues. So intervening with buildings when they're vulnerable before they become at risk, because one of the key things we've learned is once a building becomes at risk and the roof has gone and all sorts of other deterioration, they become exponentially more expensive and more difficult to resolve. So if we can intervene earlier and support reuse of the vulnerable buildings, there's all sorts of benefits here. So this is the Mond building in Swansea city centre. The patron was Alfred Mond of the Metalworks family for the Swansea Liberal Party. So this was the Assembly Hall on the top floor there. So this is currently classified as vulnerable. The banking use on the ground floor ceased around 10 years ago and the building hasn't been used since. We've currently got a listed building consent application in for possibly cafe restaurant use on the ground floor, residential middle floor, and keeping the Assembly Hall on the top floor with a new lift and staircase. We've put considerable effort into pre-application discussions and proactivity working with the owner and grant funding support in order to bring this building back so it doesn't become a problem. And these become major assets to the city. It's part of the identity of the city, be part of the street scene, the active frontage and regeneration. Another one as well, we're kind of getting ahead of the curve on in terms of not waiting for Bob buildings to become problematic, is the former Technical College building on Mount Pleasant, which is redundant since University of Wales Trinity St David moved their campus down to the SA1 Dockland area. This is a very substantially beautifully built building, which doesn't currently have a use and will never come back for education. So we're currently in discussions with a developer about high quality flats in this building. Again, lots of pre-application work, grant funding of support potentially, something different for the city. And basically the building won't change appearance outside at all. It's internal alterations. And there's some beautiful details such as the chimneys I've put on the screen there, which you maybe don't see from the ground. The level of quality that went into some of these buildings back in the day is amazing. And this building is not problematic yet. It's vulnerable and we don't want it to become at risk. Some of the other ones we're working on outside of the city, this is a grade 2 listed house by Glendingham Moxingham, who's one of the major Swansea architects of the period, who's also responsible for buildings like the Glenvivian, designed for a German industrialist out in Pontllew. So there's a house, there's a stable. We've granted, this is being saved through enabling development. So we've granted planning permission for a housing estate, a sensitively designed housing estate around this building with phasing conditions to make sure that the building is restored at the appropriate stage, as we have funded through the residential commercial development in the area. No grant funding support at all, and these will come back as homes to live in. Moving on to some of the current projects that the council has got on, this is back to the Havard Morva Copper Works. This is the former laboratory building. Image on the left is in the 1980s. So when the works shut, these buildings were in good condition. In the period of public ownership since, they have become severely dilapidated, numerous fires, numerous collapses. That's the image on the right-hand side there from probably about 7-8 years ago. I was looking back over the timelines on this. We granted listed building consent around about 2020 for repair of the shell of this building for flexible uses, and that shows the timescale of these things. Just to grant consent with 6 years, we granted consent 6 years ago. This building is currently on site at the moment. There was an enabling package first of all to make it safe, because sometimes there's risk of imminent collapse. Currently, it's on site with a local Swansea heritage building contractor to put the shell of the building back together. Considerable work to safeguard this building as it goes through. Lots of scaffolding, lots of great quality of workmanship. And it will be flexible. We're hoping a restaurant type use could go in there to complement what's going on the rest of the copper works. And there's the imagery there of what it looked like before work started. You can see the missing roofs and how dilapidated it was. This picture here is actually taken from where the visitor centre now sits for Penderyn Distillery, and the image at the top there's how it will look at the end of next year. Yeah, the end of next year when it's completed as a shell. August this year. So we're looking for a tenant. Almost at the end now. So another key project we've got back in the city centre is the former Castle Cinema. most latterly used as the laser zone, which was a good meanwhile use for many years to keep this building ticking over, but it became more and more dilapidated. And obviously, once you see vegetation on a building, that's signs of problems. It was bought by a developer as a package deal for a housing association. So this building is being saved via a combination of some council funding and majorly through social housing grant with conversion of the auditorium to new homes. The level of detail we go to in these projects, again, this took a lot of time to take through planning, listing, building consent, and I'm visiting this one currently every 2 weeks. And we have to go right up through every element of the building. On the screen there at the moment is the plaque on the very front of the bath stone of the building, which has got a beautiful carving of a castle because it's Castle Cinema. And the lettering onto the strand, you don't really see it very clearly from the ground. Once you get up close, you realise it's painted timber. So this is the sort of level of detail and quality we have to get to. Internally, it was pretty much all there apart from the seats. This is where the new flats are going to go in. What was the auditorium? It's been fully recorded, so it's on record in terms of the public record of what was in the building prior to the conversion. We also found, although the archaeologists, also found, and you maybe saw it in the press, part of the old Swansea Castle walls inside the building under the floor, which is a really exciting discovery. Obviously something the developer had to accommodate in terms of the archaeological recording. So that's now been fully digitally recorded and covered back up to protect it because it's underneath the floor of the new flats. We actually found a gate, not a gate as such, but a passageway that would have led down to the river in the castle wall. So, and when it's finished, it's going to look great. So 30 flats, restaurant unit in the front, listed building at risk, repurposed back as active regeneration in the city centre, bringing life to that part of the city. Another part of that puzzle in the city centre linked into Castle Square Gardens. Final few slides back to the copperworks. We've got two of the key engine houses that powered all the rolling functions, all the mills and that in the copperworks here. This is where some of the interesting parts of the designation of heritage assets comes in. The one on the left is the Musgrave engine house, which has dual designation. It's grade 2 star listed and is also scheduled. And the scheduling is the primary status, which means that building on the left there with the shorter tower is fully controlled by CADU. It's owned by the council, but fully controlled by CADU in terms of the consenting process. The building on the right is the former Vivian engine house, which didn't have any machinery inside it. And that's grade 2 listed, owned by the council, which means that comes under local authority listed building control. So this is some of the complexities on some of these sites, these different levels of regulation. We've got a really great project with a local contractor literally about to start on site to repurpose those buildings, as you've probably seen in the press, for a new destination building, restaurant, cafe, that sort of active use on the riverfront, and protecting all the in situ machinery of the Musgrave steam engine and the rolling mills as a heritage destination as well. So these, and collectively also one of the chimneys, the larger of the round chimney, the Vivian chimney as it's called, is also listed. So this is a collection of 3 listed buildings which had the roofs put back on not that long ago, but had not come back into use. So will be actively regenerated through the actions of the council with considerable funding support. So that's just that. I can't cover all of them, but that's the sort of the breadth of some of the projects that are coming through, the complexities, the funding, and the kind of fantastic outcomes we get at the end of it. But the key message is in order to be successful, generally this process, the heritage buildings needs an active end use. So that's the key outcome to come from the end of this, and that's the end of the visual presentation.
What? No, thank you. Well, thanks very much for that presentation. Very exciting as to what's going on, and it's in my neck of the woods as well, my ward, and obviously a past employee of the Copperworks, and to see how it was in the late 1980s to what it is now is incredible, absolutely incredible. That area of the city. Okay. Councillor Tribe, you have a question?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. I don't know whether it's the appropriate time to ask questions, but relating back to the Castle Cinema, you noticed that the original fascia is still there. Is it the intention to run that cinema on a smaller scale from the building?
The answer is no. The building's redundant as a cinema, and the consent that's been granted is where the auditorium and the screen would have been. That's been converted, subdivided into 30 flats with new windows cut in the side. The front of house area where you would have had the tickets and cloaks and that sort of thing has been partitioned off with the heritage features restored as a potential restaurant unit with frontage onto the castle. So it will be actively reused, but there won't be any films showed there.
Okay, thanks very much.
One of the questions from the members. We'll go on to the main questions now then. Through these sort of areas. And question one is from Councillor Lyndon Jones regarding to the risk register. Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the excellent report and all the hard work going on there. It's a bit of a shock when you see two cinemas that I actually saw films in. So it's a bit of a worry to see that. I'm going to say my question then, what plans are in place to update the listed buildings at risk register, given the last update was in 2016, and how often should it be refreshed going forward?
So we can't quite see who's going to sort of do. So yeah, we've collectively prepared some responses here to the question. So I'll just read out what I've got on the screen here. So obviously the 2016 listed building at risk register produced locally in Swansea helped us to identify those priority buildings, the Palace, the Albert Hall, the ones that we knew were the sort of the highest profile and the ones that had the greatest regeneration potential. So in terms of the answer to the question, so nationally, there's a listed building at risk condition survey, which is prepared and updated by CADU from time to time. So that's held by CADU nationally and not publicly available. Conservation officers do have access to it. And I don't know exactly when, but I understand in the near future, CADU are going to update their survey for Swansea. So we've got circa 515 listed buildings in the city and county of Swansea, and CADU will do a rapid visual assessment of all of them and to effectively determine which ones they consider to be at risk. We've been keeping them up to date anyway in the past, so they know which ones to focus on. So that their understanding and our understanding tallies there. So that's going to be updated nationally, and CADU use that to monitor the national numbers of listed buildings at risk. And typically most authorities are around or about 10% at risk. We're under that in Swansea. It's in the report there, the percentage. I think we're about 8% at the moment. It's in the report, and it's going to drop to about 7%. So we've got 515, and by the end of 2027, we're down to 40 listed buildings at risk. So the percentage is there. So we're slightly better than the national average, is my understanding, in terms of the number of listed buildings at risk. In terms of the local listed building at risk register, which has always been publicly available, just hasn't been updated recently, we will be keeping that up to date and syncing that in with the CADU updates. So this was produced as an officer working document, but could be potentially published for public viewing and made bilingual and put on the council website. So we think that could be done with suitable resource commitment, and then without specifying frequency of updating, maybe every 2 to 3 years we could keep that up to date, is the answer there.
Thank you. I think it is important for people to see what the at-risk buildings are, and I think any list should be published, because you could end up by getting some local support as well to bring them back to life, because it is important that they are brought back to life. And we haven't got, because a lot of Swansea was destroyed in World War II, it's really important that we keep all the listed buildings there and bring them back to life that we can. But thanks very much.
Thank you. Question 2 is from Councillor Adam Davis.
What steps are being taken to prevent vulnerable listed buildings, including the additional 68 identified by CADU, from deteriorating to the point of being added to the risk register?
Okay, I think. Yep, I'm just. So yeah, the visual presentation highlighted a couple of those vulnerable listed buildings. So we're trying to, as I said, get ahead of the curve and intervene on those buildings before they become problematic and at risk. And we're taking a very proactive approach to engaging with owners and their teams. So we've highlighted the Mond building and the former Mount Pleasant Technical College building. and all the proactive discussions we've got there. And across council departments, we always collaborate. We're sitting here, quite a high number of officers working collaboratively on these issues, making sure resources are available to identify which are these vulnerable buildings. They have to be aligned with regeneration agendas, so that's where the funding comes in. That's key. And it's sometimes in some locations the buildings have got huge potential, but they're not in the right place to get the funding, and that's one of the challenges that can sometimes be problematic. We definitely feel that more resources could be put into raising awareness amongst the owners of the vulnerable listed buildings. As I said, CADU are imminently due to resurvey all of our listed buildings in Swansea. That will identify the sort of most pressing at-risk ones, and there's that other, that number might change. We had 68, last identified by CADU. That might go up, it might go down. So we could potentially, subject to resources, write to the owners of those vulnerable listed buildings to make them aware of their responsibilities and what opportunities funding support may be available. The council does own listed buildings as well, so it's important that we manage our own assets appropriately. And maybe I could hand over to one of my other colleagues on that.
Yeah, I pick this up. Obviously, my colleagues in Culture Services, Parks and Cleansing are responsible for the preservation and management of the museum as a grade 1, Glyn Vivian Art Gallery, Dylan Thomas Centre, the Grand Theatre and Brangwyn Hall. And obviously they will work with ourselves in building services to ensure that we maintain and keep safe and secure really the properties that we've got. We have invested funding into schemes over the last few years, and will continue to do so. Obviously, the prime one being that the building that we're in the Guildhall here, and it's our intention to look at over the next year to invest more in the roof to ensure that the building is safe and secure. But any buildings that we have that fall within the heritage scheme, we obviously are keen to work with our colleagues across the departments to ensure their longevity.
Okay, Adam. Yes, yeah. Francesca O'Brien has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just sort of leading on from Councillor Davis's question. I appreciate that some of these heritage projects are privately owned, and you've sort of roughly covered it. But at what point does the council, what's the criteria that that building has to meet before the council steps in to offer that support? Because I appreciate you're looking at it from the sideline sometimes. We don't actually know what the deterioration is like inside. So what is the criteria that has to be met before the council does step in? Because I'm sure sooner prevention and stepping in is better than leaving it to the last stages. Thank you.
Yeah. So yes, when it's a privately owned building, we often rely on being notified by communities and ward councillors. So as I say, there's 515 buildings. We can't keep our eyes on every single one of them. There's certain ones we are actively working on with owners, and sometimes these issues can take quite a long time to resolve, working through, what works might be appropriate, assembling appropriate teams, applying for grant funding. It isn't quick, and it's trying to be as supportive as possible. I think there's a question later on, and it's definitely in the report, about at some point there may be a need to look at planning enforcement powers, and that's a different process, but that there are powers set within legislation to intervene if it's the point of last resort. That's a significant legal process, and there are financial risks in taking that process to the council, because it can lead to requirements for works in default, so the council stepping in and doing work. We've never had to do that in Swansea yet. We've always solved these problems through collaborative work and grant funding support and being proactive.
Yes, thank you. It's just on that point, really, that there are powers available to us as a council. We can act under legislation, environmental protection legislation, and under the Planning Act, but they are very time-consuming to be consumed within that sort of process, and they can be a financial burden on the council. So what it always means on each of these cases is that we need to exhaust all efforts in terms of working with with landowners, with owners of property, to the point where it's in their interest, really, as custodians of those buildings, to do what's required, and that is where we've been successful again on some of these projects. We've taken it to the to the nth degree, really, to the point where we haven't found ourselves going down a route which we know from experience of other authorities, that you're not going to see the delivery with the sort of with the speed and the cost efficiency that you would otherwise do if we didn't take the approach that we managed to do. And I think that example that was put up during the presentation of the property on Wine Street, the commercial property, it did take a number of years. It was a very frustrating process at times because of what was not only visually obtrusive, but what was obtrusive in terms of the activity of the on the street scene and potential dangers that it imposed as well. But we ultimately took the right approach, and we pulled back from enacting those powers because we were confident that we would get that result, and we managed to get it. So yeah, it is always about achieving that balance.
Yeah, I think, not to repeat anything, but I think that was a prime example on Wine Street, that particular one that was very, very labour intensive, very much something that we didn't want to do. But if we have to, we probably would have had to step involved, but it was working with it and looking. I think the castle, again, is a prime example of the council cinema, that looking for a sustainable outcome for that building as well. And what I'm pleased to say, I think our approach is really encouraging, and with developers particularly. In a recent developer forum meeting, I had the pleasure of having praise from Pobl to say, look, without our input, without our officers, without the positive engagement that Steve Smith and the department have brought to the table, we could not have delivered this project and would not have been able to get the successful outcome to protect some of the assets there, because that sustainability is key to the future of that building. Because we can all do a building that, but we've got to find a use to that building that is sustainable, that is self-sufficient, and protect that heritage too. So I think them are real successes that I look, if you look at the castle, not just the castle cinema, but on the top of High Street with the palace, again, that was working collaboratively as well. So more than happy, so I think that approach certainly works in Swansea.
Thank you. We've got two buildings in a conservation area in the Uplands ward, and you've got two different types of success rate going on there. One of them's in Devon Terrace on Finoni Road, where the facade fell off just before one Christmas. It's quite a sight, and thankfully now the owners are very close to actually completing the works and put a lot of time and trouble in, which must be a satisfying project. The other one is on a prime site. It's on the corner of St James's Crescent and Walter Road on the southern end with the Westbury Street Junction. That building we've had sort of police concern there that it was unsecure and being used for, let's just say, not very nice purposes. But the point I'm making here is somebody privately owns that building. It's in a conservation area. Does the fact it's in a conservation area increase the urgency because we've, as a council, made that decision to up the ante on the area to preserve aspects? Sometimes buildings will dilapidate, so some of the features might be irretrievable by the time you get round to fixing them. It does run in parallel with Councillor O'Brien's question about what actions can we take. But if a building is in private ownership, are we on a thankless task relying on goodwill? And how do we get sources of funding for owners? Because after all, it's just a house somebody's bought.
I know the buildings you're talking about there, Councillor May. So the number 4 Devon Terrace is an example, obviously, how long it can take. It must have been very difficult for the local community. The private owner has gradually repaired that building because it's in that location for residential. There's no grant funding support is part of the challenge. It's funded privately by the owner there. It is literally almost back together. The last bits of the bay windows are going on very soon, so the facade is fully replicated now, waiting for the interior to be finished. That building, the buildings on the corner, St James's Crescent, I know which ones you mean there, the ones with the Dutch gables on the front. There's two on the corner, which we have sought to engage with the private owner there. There might be scope for a more commercial use, which maybe opens up more opportunities for grant funding there. It has also, through some of the issues raised by yourselves as ward councillors, we've flagged it with planning enforcement as well to see how we could use planning powers to tackle some of those issues. So that we are very aware of those ones and we are acting on those.
And just a conservation area link,
Often with the geography, the grant funding support typically is based on Paul can probably say a bit more on qualitative outcomes such as jobs created, floor space. So often it's about the commercial outputs. So if it's a conservation area that includes a town centre, say Morriston, maybe Mumbles, for example, there's various different Welsh Government grants that might help. That part of Fanoni Uplands, if it's on the kind of high street type commercial area, maybe there's more funding support. But just being in a conservation area per se isn't always a key reason to prioritise, because of the way which we're working with funding regimes often created externally from Swansea, trying to help target it on our buildings, working in a very collaborative way, but within the framework set by others. Maybe I need to Paul.
Yeah, it's a challenging one, Councillor, because Steve says programmes we receive from UK or Welsh government tend to have policy prescriptions around them, like town centre first principle, which we always talk about targeting and prioritisation of funding, don't we? So those programmes tend to focus on the larger, the city centre and the larger town centres, where we then something I actively try to do in my role when new funding opportunities are coming or there's a chance to shape programmes. For example, parts of the Shared Prosperity Fund delivery we've done in the past 4 years through the Transforming County programme, we did create within that a pot to work with private owners, and that property was one we did try to do some work there. Time limited is the issue, though, and often it's a lengthy process. It's not just the grant, it's the whole thing of what are you going to do with it, how long is it going to take, finding the expertise to look at it. The challenge also of restoration and doing it properly with the right materials to make sure it's compliant, then that affects the budget, and is the grant big enough? And in some ways it's an iterative process constantly of each time a new opportunity comes, I have to reflect on the projects that are coming through and try and design schemes that will try and help. But ultimately, often they're time limited, and we can present the opportunity, and we've been in that situation over the past 3 years, but it hasn't been able to be taken up because of the limitations of the scheme itself. But it's not to say that we won't keep trying, and hopefully the next wave of funding that's due to start in April, we'll be able to have another attempt at some of those. It's particularly difficult when it's private ownership, because Heritage Fund, for example, will only work with public or third sector. It's very limited to private sector for the reasons would be obvious, but where we can, we're trying to work around that with our own schemes, if that helps.
Third question is from Councillor Will Thomas. This is on prioritisation and urgent cases.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. I think Councillor O'Brien and May's follow-up questions pretty much cover my question, but I will ask it just in case there is something the officers want to add. And also I want to talk about a specific case. So my question is, what process does the council use to identify fast-tracking urgent deterioration cases, ensuring delays such as grant processing do not cause further damage? Personally, from my ward in Mumbles, we've obviously got the pier and the Big Apple. The Big Apple, which is a listed building, which was hit by a car. It's been hit by a car twice, and the owners have obviously paid once to fix it, then it got hit again. That's a case, for example, of it's deteriorating very quickly. I understand there's a grant application and I'm just wondering, how these things get prioritised in a sense that it doesn't get any worse. The other thing I wanted to ask is about the pier. I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the pier isn't listed. I'm just wondering why not. And also, if you could give me a bit of background about the lighthouse as well in Mumbles. So sorry to get so localized, but those are questions that might have a follow-up. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll make a start just quickly on the funding, and I'll pass to Steve on the technical side. I mean, ultimately, the grant funding itself, as with conversation with Councillor May just now, the grant availability is ultimately the requirements of the grant are usually that there's a scheme that is prepared and ready to go, even if it's an emergency. So it does ultimately require all of the technical work to be done at the same time. So the grant provides the money and it can help with fees towards the workup of that. But as with the Apple and the pier itself, the opportunities can be presented, but it does require a level of technical work to go into it from the owners as well. Working with us, it's not just a simple case of approving a grant. All that detail can't be overlooked. It does have to be dealt with. Perhaps actually, Steve, you pick up that bit and go from there.
Okay, just briefly start on the general stuff, just to say, but sometimes the repairs to listed buildings are what's called like for like. So consent is required for where there's an alteration, a change to the character and special interest of a listed building. Often we say listed buildings, they can be structures. The pier is listed, Mumbles Pier. But often repairs, when they're correctly specified and undertaken by correct professionals, they can be classed as like for like, which means they don't need consent, which means we can speed the process. So where possible, we don't want to tie people up in red tape, but we want to make sure they do correct work. So that's a way that we can speed things up. It needs informal dialogue and ultimately enough information to confirm it is correct. And also in terms of the consenting process, we are currently, as Swansea Council, myself specifically, going through the process of applying for what's called CADU listed building delegation. So once we can prove sufficient expertise, we've got a great track record of what we've been doing, but CADU would need to verify that. That would remove the requirement when we do have listed building consent applications to refer the grade 2 listed building applications to them for sign off, as we call it. So that would take up to about, a typical listed building consent application works to an 8-week target by the local planning authority, and the CADU process can add a typical month on top of that. So from 3 months, we could go down to 2 months on a standard application. That doesn't change the way we would process grade 1 and grade 2 star listed buildings. In terms of the specifics down at Mumbles Pier, so the pier is a grade 2 listed structure. I can't remember the exact date, but it's been listed for probably a couple of decades or more. Relatively recently, the listing was split. So the old lifeboat station was originally listed as part of the pier. Now they have separate listings. So they've got 2 different listing identities. We don't hold the listing information locally in Swansea Council because buildings are listed nationally by CADU. A great place to look, and it's in the agenda report, is Data Map Wales, which you can search. It's a map search, so you can see for every ward, you can see all the distribution as pins, all the locations of all the different listed buildings, listed structures. You can see the clustering. For example, there's about 10% of all our listed buildings are in the Uplands ward, so you can see there's about 50 listed buildings in that ward. Other areas such as the pier, where there's clusterings as well. The old public toilets are separately listed there as well. The Big Apple, I can't remember the exact date, was a relatively recent listing in the last couple of years. So the earlier time it was hit by a car probably wasn't listed. It isn't currently in the report as a listed building at risk, but certainly from the information I've seen recently, and obviously the local concern, I would consider that to be listed building at risk. So we need to add that to the overall numbers. And as I understand, there is a process almost as we speak going on to review a grant funding application, talking with planning managers as well about how we can expedite that. One of the key things for the Big Apple is, does it stay in that location because it's been hit by the cars a couple of times, or should it be moved? Can it actually be moved? Will it fall apart? How do you conserve the historic fabric in that process? So we're more than open to having these dialogue with owners, but the reality is, as a conservation officer, I am the sole officer who provides that function for the council. We've got all these buildings, all these things going on, and it's finding the time to prioritise. But definitely the Big Apple will be kind of it's a small structure, but raises a lot of important issues on that one. Thank you,
Councillor Thomas, right. And the fourth question.
Could I come back, Chair, just very quickly?
Sir.
Sorry, thank you very much. The other thing is the old boathouse on off the pier. Obviously, as I understand it, the ownership of that was transferred 2, 3, 4 years ago. And obviously that's a very hard and expensive building to alter. So it's such an iconic part of the scene of the whole bay. I'm just wondering, is that on the risk register? And if not, could that also be added? I know obviously the owners have had some bad luck with at the venue. Let's just leave it at that. But you know, it is obviously a very important building as well. Thanks.
Yeah. So yes, the appendix to the agenda report today identifies all the listed buildings at risk currently in City County Swansea, including the pier, which is two listings. So both the what was it, a third of the pier has been restored. The unrestored section of the pier will be considered to be at risk, as would the old boathouse. We have granted consent for the boathouse to be converted to a kind of a restaurant event space, and we have seen some sort of movement on discharging conditions recently. So possibly signaling that some work might be happening soon on those structures, but they are difficult structures given the location to bring back into use and the costs associated.
Okay. Right, question number 4. How will the council prioritise which heritage assets to intervene on next, given the increase from 48 in 2013 to 50 assets now at risk and limited funding? Anybody want to take that one? Ralph?
Goes back to a similar point we discussed just now, really. I mean, some buildings are located in areas where the funding opportunity converges because it's city centre, or it's a larger town centre, or it's in the Gower AOMB, or it does fit, it sits in the, because the funding programmes generally are designed to accommodate these kinds of things. Sometimes they fall outside of those, or resources or funding resources aren't sufficient to pick them up. But I guess it's that we keep constantly under review, and if opportunities come along, the benefit of having the list available, and I mean, when Steve prepared the internal reports more than a decade ago, you know, we have those things in mind when funding opportunities are coming. So I guess it's something of an iterative process. That there are flagship schemes as well. Like there are major iconic buildings that will come to the top of the list because of their location and their significance. But that's not to say that other things don't get looked at, and where broader funding opportunities come, we'll do our best to make sure those are looked at, as well as when we get referrals from ward members, which we get many of on particular things, we do offer help to third parties to access grant as well. So reading through offering support with identifying funding opportunities, sometimes helping with the paperwork, reviewing submissions before they go in, and that does result in a level of success as well for some smaller schemes.
Thank you. Question 5, on the enforcement of managing private ownership. Councillor Michael Locke.
Right, question 5. What criteria does the council use to determine when to shift from a supportive to an enforcement-based approach with uncooperative private owners? And what are the estimated financial risk of using statutory powers?
Yeah, thank you. I wonder whether the answers that we provided earlier has covered the point. Do you think, Councillor, on it? If not, please do say. But I think it is about that judgment that we always need to take in terms of acting under a legislative process, which we know is going to incur that sort of considerable time and cost, and what we know we can achieve by pursuing those other methods.
Yes, thank you. I think that this question might be actually repetitive. So on that basis, we proceed to the next question, which is number 6. Are the council able to provide a list of listed buildings, which you have done, currently considered severely damaged, including private assets such as Hengeron House, which is actually in my ward? Well, it's kind of in my ward. If this cannot be provided in time for Thursday's meeting, please can you do it as soon as possible afterwards? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So The current, I'm interpreting where you're saying severely damaged as at risk. So the list of current listed buildings at risk in City County of Swansea is in the report at Appendix A, I think it is, which outlines the current ones. We've obviously looked to the future to say in the next year which ones will be coming off the at risk list, and as and when CADU update their national register, we can update the local list of at-risk listed buildings in Swansea. And also that the appendix there in the report also identifies which ones are council owned, because we do as a council still own some listed buildings at risk. We're doing great things at the Copperworks. There are others that we still need to find projects for, but there it also identifies which are the privately owned listed buildings at risk.
Regarding Henderwarren House, that was subject to a fire in 2022, and it was very severely damaged. I've recently seen pictures of it, and it seems to be exactly the same as when it was damaged in the fire. I appreciate that this is a private building and so forth, but I wondered if there was any sort of indication of what progress or when progress will actually be made by the owner.
So yes, obviously there was a devastating fire at Henderwarren House, I think over 2 years ago now. March 2022 it would have been then. So we are in regular contact with the private owner of that building, trying to help them find ways to repair the building, but it is a very potentially costly project. And I'll hand over to
Yeah, just briefly, it's one of the most challenging ones because it's of the scale of the flagship buildings in the city centre and the town centres, but it's not inside a town centre and it's in private ownership. So it's really hard to source funding for a building in that ownership model. I mean, in general, if buildings of that type are in public ownership or in the ownership of a trust, that changes things completely. And that's one thing we have suggested, that maybe a formation of a trust to look after it may be a better way to access funding. But obviously you've seen the level of damage. You're talking, probably, it'd be a project in the scale of millions, and that has to be through the correct ownership model, and it won't happen through an individual private owner on their own. It has to have the backing of a substantial organisation to manage that level of funding. So it's difficult when we're still working with the owner, and we'll continue to, but it's going to need, in order to access, say, heritage funding going forward, appropriate end use and a different ownership model probably, to be able to work with the building. It's a challenge, because the discretionary funding we'd have access to would be too small to work on it. It's just never going to be of the scale necessary to deal with a building of that size, Steve, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
On sustainability, what assurance can be provided of scheduled monuments under council ownership? Example, White Rock, Morris Castle, will not deteriorate further given focus on its managed decline.
So just for clarity, scheduled monuments are different typically from listed buildings. Typically scheduled monuments are archaeological sites, often ruinous. Some structures are dual designated. I mentioned earlier the Musgrave Engine House and also the Bascule Bridge. That's both scheduled and listed. But we are conscious that a lot of the scheduled monument sites are typically remains in public parkland areas, such as the examples there, White Rock, Morris Castle. There's others in Klein Woods. There's others in Park Melin Mynach in Gorsainen. So the council has been undertaking a review of some of these where they're publicly accessible and their heritage, and we need to understand how to better look after them. There's a term there, managed decline, and what that really means is we're not looking to put the structures back with roofs. That's not what scheduled monuments are about, and that would not be, because CADU controls the consenting regimes on scheduled monuments, and that's not what they would allow. They're managed as ruins, but that doesn't mean they can't be positively managed, and that's what the council is currently looking at, is what are the condition of these sites, what are the risks, what needs to be done to conserve these heritage sites. Some of them we don't really understand them very well, so there's this piece of work, like a scholarly piece of work, actually saying, what were they for and what can they tell us about the history of Swansea and what can we learn from them. And then the key thing is they'll have what's called a conservation management plan. So we know what the issues are, we know what the cyclical regular maintenance should be, and we know how to keep on top of these sites in future. And some of it will be then linking with community partnerships with local working. Some of these sites have got friends groups already, such as White Rock, very proactive, looking after that site already and harnessing that local energy and local passion. So and that is very much based on a cross-departmental approach. And as I say, they're different in terms of uses, as we had before. It's about sustainable use, but these are sites that have ruins, and we're trying to find ways of conserving them in a sensitive manner. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. The reason I flagged that up is obviously Morris Castle. We've had issues obviously with access to it off the Troy Bar. I know that's done under the rights of way team to try and keep that tidy. But also we've had an issue where somebody have obviously tried to encroach and tried to claim some of the land around the area of the castle. We just wondering what, about measures there in actually preventing that.
The key thing for these sites, we want to maintain the public access, but make sure that the heritage is well looked after and the sites are safe. So Morris Castle is the example. It's because it's on top of a crag. As you know, Councillor, it wasn't a castle. It was a tenement. It was workers' homes, and that site there has some access challenges. So making sure if people are going to access the site, they're doing it in a safe and appropriate manner. And the council is looking on the basis of, again, it's this approach that Paul was talking about, taking phases of funding to look at what are the issues first of all, and we're currently in the process of devising some sort of urgent initial interventions on some of these sites to tackle the most pressing issues, including such as Morris Castle, a safe way to get up to the top and enjoy the views from there.
Question 8. How is sustainability of restored buildings being ensured, particularly long-term maintenance of council-owned assets once they are brought back into use?
I'll answer the first section and then hand over to council colleagues for the other section. So the key thing about repairing or restoring any listed building is firstly to fully understand it, its materials, its peculiarities, its details, exactly what was done, why, to make sure that any repairs are appropriate and compatible. Because sometimes in the past, the use of wrong materials and appropriate materials, such as cement pointing on natural stone, can actually cause accelerated deterioration. So the first thing is making sure the specification, correct materials are used, and if they're done properly, and then the buildings are regularly maintained, it will increase the longevity of the structure. So it's that kind of specification, understanding, using the right architects, using the right teams to do the work. And then I'm going to hand over to council colleagues for how we routinely maintain buildings.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. Obviously, routine and preventative maintenance is something that's identified through the service that's managing the property, and obviously we encourage obviously regular inspections and condition monitoring. Anything that's sort of raised at that point is obviously comes through to ourselves in building services, and we ensure that that work is undertaken to enable the property to remain in use, and also to remain up to the standards. We work in partnership, obviously, with our colleagues, Steve in particular, in ensuring that the materials utilised are sustainable and robust. Then obviously it's part of our asset management framework really to undertake that. I know that obviously with colleagues then obviously we seek to leverage in external capital funding, and obviously we will then pick up and manage the work that's undertaken by specialist contractors. We've undertaken that, as I mentioned earlier, here in the Guildhall. We work in the museum. These sort of quite recent works that we are proceeding to undertake, and obviously we will also work with friends of Oystermouth Castle, and we undertake the work on behalf of the group there to ensure that again we're up to current standards. We're making sure that the materials are correct and that we're using specialist contractors to do the work in a correct manner. I think that's probably the main aspects of that. Thank you.
For Heritage, and it's Councillor Lyndon Jones.
Great, thank you. How will the council support heritage assets located outside priority funding areas? particularly rural structures that deliver few regeneration outputs, but are still nationally important. And I think you showed one on the screen actually, and that's the lighthouse at Llanmadog as an example, because obviously with a very limited commercial use, because you'd have to paddle out. But nevertheless, it's a metal structure, isn't it? It's a really important structure.
Yeah, so I'm hopefully, as I was describing earlier, there's a new suite of funding programs due to start from next month, which are being prepared at the moment, and hopefully those will have, well, the intention is they will have placemaking strands that allow for work on those structures. It's important that when the funding becomes available, that people seek to bring them forward. They may not automatically get hoovered up through the process. So if there are things that, particularly for board members aware of these structures in areas, please make sure they're flagged so that. And the other thing, I guess, is who will take responsibility for delivering a project around them. For example, to say the lighthouse as an example, if it's owned by Carmarthenshire Council, who is going to undertake the work is going to be a key question as part of the process, or who do we need to identify or secure a license to be able to deliver the works, for example. But there will be funding streams coming, and examples, Steve has mentioned the Gower National Landscape area, Pennard Castle and Pill House Pigsty are being worked on currently as well. So that funding stream is still ongoing, and there will be other funds coming.
Great, thank you. It's odd that Carmarthenshire should own that lighthouse when you can only access it from Llanmadog. Could I say that there can be localised projects as well, because I had one in my particular ward, an old chapel which is on private land. It was a single cell chapel, and I used some of my community fund. Cadw were involved, the AONB, National Landscapes, and the Gower Society and Gower Unearthed. And Helen from Gower Unearthed and I led that. And, we brought the chapel, if you like. It's not going to have a roof or anything, but it'll be protected. And we just did a geophysical survey on the site. To find, we found a graveyard and a Bronze Age settlement. So there's lots, and there must be lot. I've got two further ones, because when Cadw were at that site, they said, "Where's the well?" Well, it's on its way to the rugby club, and that must. I was speaking to Mike Scott, and that's like the next project. But there must be lots of other ones that we can do, and we can use sort of pockets of funding like that to bring those back to life, because it doesn't, the council money, there is a limit, but there is an opportunity for us to reach out.
Councillor Adam Davis.
Thank you, Chair.
This is on cross-department coordination.
Yeah, I mean, elements of this have been touched on in the reports and the answers given by officers and the cabinet members, so I appreciate that. But how are heritage planning, culture and technical issues and other departments working together to provide clear, practical guidance for councillors, owners and communities on monitoring and reporting issues with listed buildings?
Right.
Yes.
So that's yes. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, we start from that. There is practical guidance available on managing any change to listed buildings for communities and for applicants, which is available nationally on the Cadw website. But I think there is and coupled with that is information that we provide in terms of our general enforcement capacities in the planning context for any reporting of issues in relation to anything that is thought to be outside the permitted development scope. Then, so the local communities and individuals, groups should always be armed with that sort of information to know that they're able to report any sort of unauthorized works. But I think I think it's a good point in relation to listed buildings in particular, and it might be something that we can look at in respect of our own website information on this, as to whether there's anything that can link in with the statutory guidance available nationally that I referred to there, in particularly in respect of listed buildings. So if it's okay, we'll take that one away as a potential action. Great. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, we'll take that, put that probably one of the recommendations, Evans, anyway. Right, the next question is from Councillor Lyndon Jones.
I think you probably answered this one, actually. In fact, I'm pretty sure you have. And it's about a complete list of listed buildings in Swansea, and you've actually covered that, Chair. But I do have a follow-up one. So, how is the council engaging with community groups, specifically schools and potential building preservation trusts, to build capacity for protecting heritage assets in private ownership? And again, I think you've answered part of that with the answer on Henry Vollen House, for example. But I'll leave that to you.
Yes, I mean there are lots of activities across different council departments, but just some that I'm aware of from work with Steve in particular. So wherever we've had some of the major projects going on, like the Half Copper Works, and well, a lot of the activities there with Heritage Fund, the Palace Theatre, there have been school visits to the sites so that school-age children can walk around the construction sites with the contractors to see the work going on. The Beyond Bricks and Mortar work placements have taken place as well, and there's been a high level of success of individuals doing the work placements being taken on by the local contractors, which is really good. There's also been a significant amount of work on heritage interpretation. Certainly in my team, I take student placements from the Heritage School in the university every year. They've worked with friends groups to extend what we can do to, for example, one of the recent examples is Park Llewellyn Heritage Interpretation leaflets. The student worked with members of the friends group to generate content, which we then help to format and get produced to add to a family of leaflets. Another really good example is the Friends of Havard Morver, who had long had a passion to restore the Musgrave engine in its entirety, which is a significant piece of machinery. So they've picked off one small part of it called the barring engine, which is the starter motor, I think you term it. Very big for a starter motor. But just the exercise of going through that group has now learnt the complexities of dealing with a major heritage artifact, working with CADU, working with us on funding, working to deadlines, working with the unknown, because lots of the parts have been stripped off that thing. So whilst quite a stressful process for them, they've come a long way as a group now and learned significantly about what's involved, which perhaps then potentially to apply for bigger funding in future. They've shown they can handle the level of funding we were able to do through Shared Prosperity Fund. That sets them up to talk to other groups and to do more than themselves in future. So lots of good examples. There are many more. We could be here all day,
Steve?
Just one other thing to add, there is a skills challenge. So when it's a major project, Palace Theatre, for example, with a major lead contractor, they will bring specialists from all over Wales and possibly beyond to work on buildings. Specific example being the use of lime mortar. It's not difficult. It's just so many people don't understand it anymore because everyone's taught how to use cement mortar. And as I mentioned before, that's probably the wrong thing to do for many heritage buildings because it seals up all the mortar joints, it traps the moisture, forces out through the stone, causes the stone to deteriorate. It's very well known the problems that you get, but on the smaller projects, it's finding the trades, finding the people who can actually do the work at the time and cost that seems appropriate. So there is a need, and potentially through some of the apprenticeships and some of the shadowing and some of the exposure to sites, to grow this traditional skills base. We've got a huge amount of buildings, even if they're not listed buildings, they're still traditionally built, and it's just conserving the building stock that we've got. So there's major opportunities there for future generations to engage in these things to keep our places looking great.
Question. Next one is on future planning. How secure is future funding for heritage restoration, given the uncertainty around successor programmes to the SPF, and how resilient is the council's strategy to funding reductions? Paul, probably
Yeah, it's as I've kind of already said, Shared Prosperity Fund was a very flexible program which has enabled us to do a huge amount in the past 4 years, but we're hoping to take the best parts of that and move forward through the proposed local growth fund from Welsh Government from April, and potentially the Council Economic Growth Fund as well. So the learning from all of these projects is feeding into the design of those new strands, which yeah, the elements that are necessary for this agenda are, as far as we can see, it looks positive they'll be included.
Thank you. That's very, very assured and hope that we will get what we hopefully should receive. Questions from Councillor Will Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. What lessons were learned from grant funding projects that became challenging due to unforeseen circumstances, and how will these shape future project planning? A slight caveat or follow up to that also is, I guess you're allowed to put contingencies into grant applications, and to what extent, because everything seems to go over budget, including my house renovation. So I'm sure, council heritage projects go massively over budget. So what's the contingency that you're allowed to? And then if you have to go back again, I imagine that's a huge amount of officer time. So how do you deal with that also?
Paul?
I'll make a start, and other colleagues may want to jump in. It's a challenging one, as I just mentioned, with the Friends group, with the barring engine, and parts of that engine disappeared, and having to trace drawings and asking modern engineering firms to produce parts that, maybe from decades ago. There's an element of complete guesswork as to what a budget is going to be for things like that, but also with a building the scale of the Palace Theatre or the Albert Hall or the Powerhouse, or we're looking at Danby House and others. You can do a visual inspection of a structure, but when it's in a state of deterioration where it's dangerous, it's how far you go with an investigation versus a quantity surveyor making an estimate of how much it's going to cost. Inevitably, if it's a visual inspection, that guess is bound to be below what's necessary. But as well, you can't account for all the other things that go on with the economy and availability of construction capacity, inflation, all the rest of it. So I guess one thing we're learning on the copper works is to go further with the enabling package, to do more invasive investigations up front. So it does increase the cost of the early stages, but that does save, hopefully, further down the line, because all the uncertainties have become known. But that does cost. So I guess it's an acceptance of having to invest more at the outset in order to save longer term. That's definitely been a significant learning point where things are in a really dilapidated state. Preferably, of course, as members have mentioned, if we can get to these structures before they get into that condition in the first place, that's obviously preferable. But the structures we're working on are ones that they're flagship buildings, really, aren't, that we can't lose from the street scene of the county. That's as a starter.
Just two other things that I have learned, and I've alluded to certainly one of them in the presentation, is once a project gets up and going, as Paul said, we don't really know half of the things these buildings are going to tell us as when we've got the application stage. They've got loads of plans we have to go through. It's really when we start taking the buildings apart, finding all these amazing unforeseen things. Sometimes they're really interesting, sometimes they're really problematic, but it needs regular visits. In terms of my role, I can't do this by looking at photographs. I can't do it by talking to people online. I need to physically go and look at the buildings, climb over the scaffold. That can be up to every 2 weeks on some projects like the Albert Hall and the Castle Cinema, and there's no fee income from that work. So it's part of the planning regulatory pre-service. There's no fee income from listed building consent applications either. So we have to do it to stay on top of the project, but it's coming out of core funding. We want these projects to be a success, and we need to build the relationships with these developers and their, their specialists. So it really pays off, but it's very time intensive. The other thing we need to make sure that we do at the end of a project is we keep good records. What we don't want to do is kind of 5 years down the line go, well, we don't quite know what we did here. We're going to have to take this apart again, and reinventing specifications. And it's, especially in the digital age, it's very easy to have a project file at the end and everything's recorded. And, we're only ever custodians of these buildings. All of these buildings will outlive us. So when future generations come to fix them in future, hopefully they won't get as bad as some of them have got recently. They'll know exactly what's done, exactly what lime mortar to use, even exactly what paint color to use if necessary. So they don't have to spend time thinking again. And we're just better at maintaining. And that's what's called these conservation and management plans. It's like a logbook for the building. We know exactly what work's been done. We know exactly when it needs to be looked at again and exactly what to do. And it just makes it so much simpler.
Could I just follow up, Joe, just very
Yes.
quickly? Thank you. So when you apply for grants, what is the contingency that is roughly allowed, and how often would you say these contingencies are going over and you have to go back? And I understand that you said you've learned a lot, and obviously those processes seems to be like they've been improved over the years maybe, but inevitably it still happens. We're going to have supply chain shocks probably now with this situation in the Middle East, and so how often does that happen, and is it easy enough to get the funding? Do the funders see it as, do they accept the circumstances, or do some projects sort of ground to a halt?
Yeah, I have a figure in my head of 10%. That is arbitrary, and I mean often it can end up going significantly beyond that. It would be on various lines within a project as well. It wouldn't be an overall figure as well. So along each line of estimating what's going to be spent on each component, there's contingency along the way, and then a top-up contingency on top of the contingency, and there'd usually be an inflation allowance as well. But again, time elapses. Funding applications for bigger grants, particularly say with National Lottery Heritage Fund, the lengthy processes because you go through a development phase in which can be up to 2 years. So you've got maybe 12 months applying, 2 years doing a development phase to work the scheme up and setting the costings. Then you have another several months while that's being assessed and considered for the full works package. Then you get that award, you go out to tender. That's then 5 years after you started looking at the original costings, and 5 years is a long time. So it does depend on the grant process. Funders do tend to be, where you're in a period of that length of time, funders do tend to be understanding of that. And that they have been open on certain projects to us going back and revising a request for grant, and certainly with smaller projects which we fund through the council, we will always look carefully at circumstances, and you're not going to decline a worthy request. But increasingly, I think there's an assumption the costs are going to be high, and that has to be factored in at the outset. So because costs have risen massively in the past, say 7 years, it's a huge seismic change in the level of, partly down to the amount of construction going on as well. And Steve referred to difficulty sourcing expertise. It's because there's a huge amount going on. People are pulled in all directions, and that drives the cost up as well. So there's a skills element there, as Steve said, which hopefully will help in the future. Does that help, Councillor? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so. It's what I'm trying to wrap my head around really is like what happens if you go over the contingency, but it does seem that the funders are understanding, and they don't have any real problems with projects hitting a brick wall, basically, which is good news.
And maybe just to add, there is an expectation that the applicant considers their own financial resources as well at the outset. So it's not just the grants. There's usually a significant match funding component, whether it's a private owner, the council, or another body. That does have to play in as well. There's an expectation that the applicant themselves also source some of their own match funding to address shortfalls.
Okay. And the next question is from Councillor Mark Tribe.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say initially that congratulations to the team for previous successes, and the future looks equally exciting. But the second question is, given the placemaking and heritage team has less than 3 full-time officers, 2.8 to be precise, is the council confident it has sufficient capacity to manage both regulatory duties and proactive heritage priorities going forward, or are there any plans to increase the staffing required? Thank you.
Evans.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really, really good and pertinent question that we need to deal with. I mean, I think if there's two key things that members of the group would take away from today's session, is that, you know, one, placemaking heritage group punches considerably above its weight in terms of what it manages to do in terms of a regulatory function and that sort of proactive project work. In effect, putting ourselves on the front foot with a lot of these things. The other thing is just how much we work together with these key departments and teams that are here today, you know, answering these questions. And I hope we've demonstrated to you how that's absolutely pivotal to achieving success. We certainly wouldn't have been able to do it without all of this kind of expertise and skill sets in, as I say, project management and funding leverage, making sure that we have strategies in place ready to jump on whichever form of funding is available for this, and also linking in with cultural services, building services that all have an important role in terms of safeguarding our own assets as a council, but also recognising where we can work with private owners. We are always there's no doubt at all we are always going to be able to achieve more with more resource on this, and we're always looking for, as well as the funding in terms of the funding for projects, move those forwards. We'll look for those opportunities to increase our resources and skills within teams as well. Sometimes those opportunities are there, particularly on highly skilled areas. You know, we would love to be able to have more of that sort of heritage expertise. As I say, you know, we're very lucky to have Steve in terms of the skill set that he has, not only in terms of the strategic projects we talked about, but some of the real kind of detailed work on heritage aspects, fine detail of buildings, and always looking for that. And if whenever there is funding available to be able to get resources in, and sometimes they do present themselves, we will pursue that. But you know, important is, as I say, is to continue bolstering that resource by bringing in all of those you know, existing officers and skills that we've got across teams, and that's going to be important to ongoing future success.
When you come back, Councillor Drive.
So, yes, thank you, Chair. Tom, I just wondering, the relationship with CADU, is it equally as proactive? But with my my ward hat on, I can maybe think of an example. We have one of the oldest churches in Wales, in Llangefellach, that's linked to another ancient church in Clace. There's a pilgrim's path that runs between the two churches, between Clace and Llangefellach, which has sadly been neglected. I just wonder what the relationship with CADU is in restoring sites like this, which should be revered and treasured. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Steve come in on the detail of the site, but what I'd emphasise again is the importance of fostering those really good working relationships with CADU. Again, it's we can't fall back on just our existing regulatory functions. Steve talked about working through to get to the point where we have delegated responsibility for some of these decisions on a certain grade of listed buildings, but we have to have those good relationships with CADO as well to make sure that we can where there is a project that's particularly important to a community like the ones that you've highlighted there, that we're able to link in with CADU to make sure the work that's needed to be done is being done. In terms of the project itself, Steve, I don't know whether you've got
if I could just, I'm conscious of time, just briefly mention we have a very good working relationship with CADU. There's a number of inspectors. There's an inspector of listed buildings and an inspector of scheduled monuments. Obviously scheduled monuments, they make their own decisions on those. Listed buildings, we refer all our cases to them in terms of getting the decisions. CADU also provide grant funding for projects. The council's been in receipt of some of that grant funding, and communities in Swansea have also been in receipt of that grant funding. And what we didn't mention, because it's quite complicated as well, is that where churches, active places of worship, typically Church of Wales, Anglican Church, and the Catholic Church in Wales, they've got what's called ecclesiastical exemption, which means any changes made to active places of worship of those key denominations, they make their own decisions outside of the local authority listed building control process. So there's a separate process sitting with the diocese to make decisions there, and they're really good to talk to about keeping buildings in use. Once a church becomes redundant, then it comes under local authority control. Often some of these locations, I don't know exactly the area you're talking about, their council or tribe, they might not be part of the listed building curtilage, so it might just be a piece of land that's very historic but doesn't have a designated heritage status. But CADU are usually very, very positive about all sorts of projects. They will always want to make sure the heritage is fully understood, and they have a lot of information on their website. They have an approach called conservation principles to make sure that changes are properly understood and justified in everything they do. But they're very supportive of community action as well on all sorts of fronts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I can't see no hands up, no further questions. Can I thank Cabinet member and the officers today for an excellent report that they give to us, and also for the very, very precise and detailed responses which you received. And there's a lot of information that we've obviously learned today as a panel. We will now discuss the points that have been raised today, and then we will write formally to the Cabinet member with any recommendations. You're quite willing to stay if you want to, but if you want to go, more than happy. Okay.
Ask the members to stay on.
And can the members online stay online, please? Just so we can just flash out some points or recommendations that we can send forward.
Just before I go, can I just put on my record, my thanks on record to the committee today for particularly showing the interest they have, because I think we have got a good news story. I think there's a lot to do. There's a lot more challenges, but I think collaboratively working together, we've demonstrated today we will overcome some of them challenges. So put on record my thanks to the committee for showing the interest they have. Thank you.
Thank Councillor Opland for that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Right, that was a very interesting session, everybody, and thanks for all your questions and your participation. Clear the issue there where you wanted to find out about all the sites in Swansea, not only in council ownership but private ownership. So if you can have to look at that to see where we are with that, and I know it was mentioned a 3-year cycle, but it's just would that be sufficient enough? And also there's issues as well with the different sorts of legislation with CADU and with because of the listed building consent and that, which both working together. And what I found interesting as well was mentioned with the officers is a lot of good cross-departmental working through the sort of planning and heritage and culture and leisure. So that seemed that was that was working well then. I know there's issues obviously about the around the funding and how we perhaps would look at the size of the project, and then around whether we would whether that funding would be sufficient to carry that project through. Is there a time when they review the actual project on how the funding is going forward for it? But I'm open for members if they want to flag anything up that they want that we could perhaps put in a letter to the cabinet members with some recommendations. Well,
thanks, Chair. I think that was really useful meeting. Actually, it was good. One thing from a personal point of view, I know they did say they'd flag it up, but the urgency around the Big Apple, which is, I don't know if if you just go on Facebook and have a look at the deterioration of it since it's been hit by the car. And obviously people have been ripping it open and trying to get inside ever since. So that one's quite an urgent one. So I'm wondering if a panel would agree to, just flagging that as urgent. The pier and the boathouse also, that if they're not sorted out in a couple of years, we're going to lose them. So although maybe not quite as urgent as the Big Apple, those two are also urgent. So if we could, just pen comments to that regard, that'd be appreciated. Thanks.
I think the edges also recognise that, Will, when you flagged it up, about the importance of the Big Apple, of getting it listed there. So as I said, did say to the officer that would be one of our recommendations. Anyway,
great, thanks, Mike.
Yes, I have to say that I was quite impressed by the quality of the team. I thought they are doing a really good job. My chief concern is the burdens which are held privately, because I think some of those, which includes the one that has just been mentioned, some of those, the progress is actually quite slow. But the ones owned by the council, I think, are fine. Well, in general.
I've got a couple throughout the meeting. We asked a question about could you list all the sites. Now we were referred to the data map in Wales, and I've looked at it now, and it is very good. You can actually zoom in on your wards. You can zoom in on, and it gives a description of why it's listed, when it was listed, on the map. So I think an action point for the cabinet member on that is possibly ways for people to raise awareness that is a public encyclopedia, because we often as ward members get questions, you can't touch that, it's listed. Well, they don't, one way of finding out is people. So I think the question is there on actually publicising this tool, which is open to all. I never knew of it. Got on it, and I was sort of quite hooked, and possibly didn't pay attention in the meeting once I'd found it. But how to raise awareness of that existing facility.
The regular contact with ward members, as you say, to work with the council on those areas of concern, as I say, unlisted buildings or private buildings that could fall into disrepair. And at least then we have then got our eye on the ball then, and we as local members.
And where they are, and you know where they're not.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, it gets rid of the myths, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think the question, if I could, or the action point to be so bold, is steps to raise awareness that this map does in fact exist, both with members and with members of the public too.
Yeah. Councillor Tribe.
I just wondered whether it might be handy to have a pre-meeting before the main discussion in the future, so we can prioritise projects. I think Will is correct. I think the Big Apple should be top of the tree, if you forgive the pun, in terms of projects. I don't know whether the others are agreeable with that. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that it's obviously a ward casework issue for Will and Fran, but I think given how fragile the structure appears to be and how iconic it is for generally Swansea's like seafront, that it's an excellent case that this is a priority that needs to be expedited. So yeah, I mean, funnily enough, I did go for a drive past it last night, and like it looks. Yeah, it needs care, and it would be a crying shame if Swansea lost such a quirky and unique icon, to be honest with you. So yeah, full weight behind it.
Can I come back to Councillor Tribe? We don't really usually have like a pre-meeting thing after we've done the inquiry. We just get the letter in and our recommendations, because we would have, as we do here now, actually putting together what we feel is important to write to the cabinet member.
So there will be some follow-up by the SPC in about sort of 9 to 12 months' time after this meeting. The working group will then be brought to the SPC for follow-up then. So there will be that opportunity. So in terms of that recommendation with the Big Apple, there will be opportunity then for that to be picked up at that point.
Hey, Councillor Tribe, as I say, this report will go to the Scrutiny Programme Committee anyway at one stage, because once we've done the panel inquiry, they then filter through to the Scrutiny Programme Committee to see how progress has been made on these areas. All right?
Yeah, that's fine. As long as there's an opportunity for us to decide priorities, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
What will happen now? As I say, we've written down the areas that we want to look at, and when send the letter in and possible recommendations. But that letter will come out before we send in draft, to see if you're more than happy within the contents of that letter. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor May.
I think you've been very lucky with this working group, because the ones I've chaired have generated action point after action point, and I think we've been very fortunate really to have such a a team of officers as really on the ball, and you can see the actual commitment and passion that they show in their roles. So I think that the letter is going to have limited recommendations, really, because it seems that they're doing quite a good job. However, I would say again, it's mainly on information to assist them doing their job. I've referred to the map earlier, but I also when we field sort of ward queries, we'll also talked about dilapidated buildings and an eyesore and everything like that. Would it be worth, as part of a recommendation, perhaps an information toolkit to members be published of the various sort of remedies or legislation that could, that could assist them in remedying sort of eyesore buildings? Because I think about 3 or 4 pieces of legislation were mentioned in a discussion, but it might be good to have it clarified for all members to benefit from, across the city, because I think it's an issue we've all got. Yeah, that'd be good. Because
yeah, you just and report to members what they got in their areas and how things are with those buildings, and if there's any sort of issues that they need to flag up, and who they need to perhaps get in touch with as well. Okay.
Because they're doing a very good job, and I think you've been in a fortunate position of we haven't really got much that we can ask them to do, except for us to help them with the work they're doing and raise awareness.
Yeah. Okay. There's no more further questions. Can I thank you all, members who've come on the panel for this scrutiny panel today. Hopefully we can now get some recommendations put together. We send in a letter, but we'll send out in draft first what we want to put forward, and then if you want to make any comment, but then, as I say, that will go then through to the scrutiny program board, and a report then will eventually go to council, as well. Okay. So if nothing further, and then to say on the meeting, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you all again. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Chair. Cheers. Bye.